Okay, let's jump right in. We're doing a deep dive today, looking at some really insightful notes. They're a summary from a supervision course by John Fredrickson and Yuval Lon.
That's right. And these notes, they essentially capture the kinds of, common challenges therapists are grappling with, the stuff that comes up in supervision.
Exactly. And the focus for us today is really about how therapists can use their own emotional responses.
Yes, countertransference.
Yes, countertransference, but using it in a very specific way.
How so?
It's about grounding those feelings. You have to analyze them based squarely on the clinical data and the specific context of that particular case. It's not just about feeling something.
Right. It's about understanding why you're feeling it in relation to the patient.
Precisely. And the mission really is to explore how doing this carefully, this thoughtful, data-based approach, actually helps promote mental health.
For both the patient and the therapist, which is key. Absolutely for both. Getting really clear about where an emotion actually belongs. Is it a response to the patient's reality or is it something else? That clarity is fundamental.
It makes sense if you feel something that accurately reflects the patient's state.
Then it's incredibly useful. The notes really emphasize this. Feeling emotions where they belong can illuminate the path forward. It guides the therapy.
But the flip side, feeling things where they don't belong, that must be where things go wrong.
Oh, definitely. It can be seriously misleading. You could head down a completely wrong therapeutic path. And that's why the notes hammer home this point about being rigorous, stick to the data, what the patient actually said, how they behaved, their history alongside the session context.
So that analysis of your own feelings, but checked against the facts, that's the safeguard.
That's the vital safeguard, yes. It protects the focus. It protects everyone's emotional well-being in that room.
Okay, so the notes give examples, right? Like when a patient says therapy is making them feel worse.
Yes, and that's a tough one for any therapist.
Right. Yeah, I imagine your gut reaction might be worry or maybe guilt.
Instantly. And this is exactly where checking that feeling against the data is crucial. The notes contrast two scenarios.
Okay.
In one, the patient was talking about some pretty heavy stuff, crisis, trauma. The therapist felt worried, felt guilty.
Right.
But looking at the data, the patient was sharing trauma and maybe seemed a bit compliant or stuck. The therapist's worry was identified as, a valid response. It belonged there.
So it wasn't a sign the therapist messed up, but more a reflection of the patient's intense distress and maybe their history.
Exactly. And noticing that compliance piece alongside the worry helped the therapist realize, okay, the first step here is restoring the patient's sense of agency, their will, which is often key after trauma.
So the countertransference, once analyzed with the data, actually pointed the way therapeutically.
It did. It guided the next step.
Okay, that makes sense for a valid feeling. What about the second example? The patient felt better right after the session, but then felt worse later on.
Ah, yes. A different situation entirely. The therapist's first instinct might be, again, oh no, what did I do? Maybe feeling some shame or self-blame.
That countertransference kicking in again.
Right. But looking closely at the specific data, this context, the patient felt relief right after, but then kind of spiraled later. It paints a different picture.
So the session itself wasn't the problem.
It seems not. It suggests the session was helpful, but maybe the patient's own internal dynamics, perhaps a resistance to feeling good or changing, triggered the later suffering after they left.
Ah, I see. So the suffering wasn't caused by the session, but followed it due to the patient's own patterns.
Precisely. And once the therapist saw that distinction, backed by the data, their own feelings shifted. The notes say they felt more empathy for the patient's internal conflict instead of being stuck in their own shame.
Which then lets them address the real issue, the patient's resistance maybe.
Exactly, rather than trying to fix a problem the therapist didn't actually cause.
This clarity feels so important. It connects to that urge therapists sometimes feel, to just say, I'm sorry.
It does. And it feels like the right empathic thing. But the notes advise pausing.
Before you apologize.
Ask yourself, is this apology for a genuine mistake I made? A real rupture? Or is this urge part of some pattern we're both stuck in, an enactment? Or maybe, did I just miss the patient's own difficulty and I'm taking the blame wrongly?
So if the data really shows, the therapist messed up, then an apology is needed.
Absolutely. That's owning reality, and it can be very repairing.
But if the issue is more about the patient's defenses or this mutual pattern,
then the therapeutic task is different. It's about naming that dynamic, maybe the patient's pattern, the internal conflict, whatever it is, not absorbing blame that doesn't belong to the therapist.
and analyzing your own urge to apologize against the data helps you figure out which it is.
That's the idea. That rigorous analysis, always grounded in the case specifics, the data, the context, it really is that vital safeguard.
Yeah, you said that before, and it really lands now. It protects everyone involved.
It keeps the therapy focused on what's actually happening, what's truly therapeutic for the patient, and protects the therapist's ability to think clearly, too.
Okay, so let's wrap up with a final thought for you, the listener, based on all this. Think about those moments in therapy, maybe your own therapy, or if you are a therapist, when things feel really tough.
Yeah, stuck, like you're hitting a wall or maybe feeling trapped somehow.
These notes suggest that sometimes those impasses might actually be what they call mutual enactments. Like both people are caught in an unconscious pattern together.
And the very first step out of that, often it's simply becoming aware of the dynamic, which, interestingly, often starts by reflecting on your own emotional reactions, especially when things feel difficult.
Checking those feelings against the data, like we've been saying.
Exactly. Gaining that awareness can be the key that starts to unlock things for everyone involved.
So maybe reflect on that. How can noticing your own feelings, particularly in those difficult moments, and really examining them against the facts of the situation, light up the path forward? Something to think about.